Hello, welcome to another Team Sense Tuesday webinar. My name is Caroline Rizzo, and I am so excited to have Rob Belena, our head of sales, and Sheila Stafford, our co-founder and CEO, joining us today. Today is a really great topic for HR managers. We're going to really dive into how HR's role in driving bottom line results while also balancing the responsibility of delivering engagement and retention is super important. But before we jump really into it, let's cover a few housekeeping items. So as always, we love questions throughout the webinar. We just ask that you place it in the Q&A panel that is at the bottom of your screen. We will plan to get to the questions at the end of the webinar, and we'll make sure to save plenty of time for that. Also, you may have noticed that we are recording this webinar. So if you have to hop early or if you want to revisit the content at a later date, no problem. We will be emailing out the webinar recording via a YouTube link. But as always, you can go to teamsense.com/webinars. You can always take a look at past webinars we've had and see what's upcoming for the next week. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. So as I mentioned, my name is Caroline Rizzo. I am the marketing manager at TeamSense. And why am I here today? I love hosting webinars weekly and talking about topics that I think are super interesting and I know that are relatable to HR managers, operations managers, and manufacturing and logistics. Frankly, I don't have all the answers. So what I love to do is bring in people that do have the answers. And I love talking about different topics, like, for example, how to drive impact to your bottom line. So I'm excited to learn more today from Rob and Sheila, who have a lot of experience in this as business leaders, especially in the manufacturing space. So without further ado, let me pass it to Sheila. Welcome, Sheila.
Hi, thanks, Caroline, the hostess with the mostess. Appreciate you. Hi, everyone. I'm Sheila Stafford. I'm the CEO and co-founder of TeamSense. Prior to founding TeamSense, I've got a variety of experiences across, I like to say, across the entire P&L, which is something I know we'll talk about in and around manufacturing companies. I've worked at Ford, General Motors, Whirlpool Corporation, and Fluke, and Fortive before joining and founding TeamSense.
Such an impressive background. So glad to have you here today. Rob, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Belena. I'm head of sales at TeamSense. Spent a little over 15 years in various sales roles selling software, and I've been at TeamSense now for over a year. And what I love about TeamSense is getting to go on a journey with our customers, and particularly helping folks that are usually the first tasters of TeamSense, the HR teams, and helping them take the benefits that they see out of TeamSense, translating that into things that are applicable to operational leaders and helping them get TeamSense deployed across their teams.
Absolutely. I like how you have a direct connection with both HR managers and op leaders. So you really understand both of their needs. So that's fantastic. Okay, so let's jump into things, and I'm going to stop sharing. We're just going to go straight like we're in a podcast here and talk in conversational tone. So really, let's set the stage. Why are we here today? Why should HR managers really care about this topic? Will it level up their career? That's always something that I would be thinking about. But I would love to kind of set the stage too in terms of understanding what is it that we're covering today. So we talked a little bit about in our promo of this webinar how intangible improvement isn't enough, even measurable operational improvement isn't enough either. It really must have an impact to the profit and loss statement. So obviously we'll be talking quite a bit about profit and loss statements and what that means in your business and how you can have an impact on that as an HR manager. But also let's talk about some tangible things that you can do to make an impact. Some of these things are quick, easy wins, and that's fantastic. We'll talk more about that. But then we also want to take a look at what are some of the more long-lasting impacts. Because while quick wins are great and they're super fun to have, you also have to think about long-term and what is the thing that will make a long impact. So let's jump into it. So Sheila, I'd love to get your take on this. Obviously, you are the CEO of a company. You've had experience with profit and loss statements. That's something that you think about during the day and probably at night too. Can you explain to us a little bit more about really what the profit and loss statement is? Who is generally paying attention to it in the business as well?
Yeah. I do dream about the P&L. Thanks for that, Caroline. So if I think about from like a 10,000 foot view and like a we'll say educational, like description of the P&L, I talk a lot about being able to speak in the language of business, right? And so when you are any sort of function within a business, you have to speak the language of business in order to get your initiatives funded and listened to and approved. And it just so happens the universal language of business is dollars. And the way that that comes up is on the P&L. And so understanding the P&L is like understanding another language. Understanding that language allows you to then speak with your colleagues in that same language, and then allows you to actually move from company to company to company because everybody's P&L is structured in a very similar way, and it tells you a lot about that underlying business fundamentals. And so that would be like the non-educational version. The educational version is the P&L stands for profit and loss statement. It is a financial statement that summarizes revenues, costs, and expenses incurred during a specific period of time. So it could be a P&L by month, it could be a P&L by quarter, a P&L by year. Typically, companies refer to them as a P&L by fiscal quarter and then year. The purpose of the P&L statement is to show whether a company has earned a profit or incurred a loss during that given period of time by subtracting, the revenues that come in, the expenses from the revenues that come in to give an overall sense. Now, it's really common for manufacturing companies and lots of companies actually to have one kind of corporate giant P&L, but the way that they transfer business ownership to individuals to actually kind of own and control their destiny is by breaking off a portion of the P&L for that business. So for example, during my time at Whirlpool Corporation, I had responsibility for the North America refrigeration business, for example. And so the P&L for the refrigeration business was under kind of my purview, while somebody had a P&L for the cooking business, the dishwashing business, the laundry business. All of those then kind of collaborated together for a P&L for the entire business, for example. Now, I think the question is like, why should HR care about the P&L? And like, where does that impact is shown? Like, where can you find that? So the first is, HR should care about the P&L because of labor costs. Labor costs are often a significant portion of any company's expenses. And obviously HR is responsible for managing personnel, including hiring, compensation benefits, and training. And like a swing in labor costs can dramatically swing an overall company's P&L. And so understanding, where those labor costs come in. The next way HR should care, and I've got 5 of these here, so we're on number 2, is employee productivity. So HR plays just a vital role in enhancing employee productivity and engagement. And programs aimed at improving employee morale and reducing turnover are often like really hard to fund. But the reality is that that has a huge impact on the P&L from an overall productivity standpoint, and it's translated into financial performance and productivity and results, because you don't have kind of those turnovers and onboarding expenses, and you should be able to see some results there. The third reason is budget and forecasting. P&L setup is how most companies communicate what the budget is to the individual departments. And so obviously understanding the financial performance of the overall company and understanding how much you play in part of that budget will help you kind of forecast and understand where the company is going, so you can adjust your plans and stay on top of the overall trends of the business. The fourth is strategic decision-making. And so by understanding kind of the financial implications, like we mentioned with, budget and forecasting and productivity and labor cost, you can then understand how you might contribute more effectively to the overall strategic direction of the company. If you see, labor cost shooting up like crazy, like there's a sense that that cost has to come out from somewhere else, because unless you can take your prices up and increase revenue, you're gonna have to figure out how do you reduce cost. Labor cost is not something you can reduce without some pain, right? So you have to lay people off. And so understanding kind of what the implications are and like, can you get costs out of your suppliers might give you some ideas into the strategic decision-making of the company. And the last, and probably what Rob will dive into pretty deeply here, is alignment with business objectives. ultimately HR's role is to support the achievement of the company's goals. And by understanding kind of the financial metrics that are in the P&L, you can align your initiatives and strategies with the broader business objectives, ensuring that your HR activities contribute positively to the bottom line and the long-term success of the company.
That is a amazing overview. I think in terms of it feeling super relatable is, we talk about here at TeamSense having your commander's intent. I like to think of it as a North Star that you're pointing to. So it's so great to be able to understand your company's objectives and your company's goals and how you can individually as a department tie to it and then as an individual. I think it's a huge motivator in terms of just doing better work and actually seeing impacts on the business. So I think that's super helpful to think of it in those terms as well. And Rob, I don't know if you had any things that you wanted to add to that as well, based on your experience.
Sure. Yeah, I'll just say, this translation layer that needs to happen is not something unique to HR or HR managers. I mean, this is human nature that when we have an initiative or a product that we want to buy or something to support our area of the business, of course, we see it first and most naturally from our own point of view. And across the board, no matter who you are, the natural thing is to share those benefits with other people and say, look how this benefits my domain, my area, my particular workday. And sort of there's this assumption that people will understand that and attribute value to that. There's that old adage of like, don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job that you want, right? And it's like, to the extent that anybody can become well versed in speaking to the value that others can realize from an initiative or a product or something that you are putting forth, that is only going to open up doors for both, the success of that particular initiative, but also your success, your ability to have those kind of conversations and share those things. And it reminds me, in a previous role, I was working at a company called Cloudera, which is a highly, highly technical product. And we were selling primarily into IT. And so it was conversations about analytic workloads and query speeds. And it was quite literally a translation to the business owners, the people that would fund projects, because you would start to talk to them about query speeds and their eyes would cross and they would just like, I have no idea what you're saying. Like, I don't know why that matters to me at all. And so it was on both, vendors like me, but also on the technical experts who were wanting to put forth this initiative to translate those benefits that they were expecting to see into something that was understandable and mattered to, domain peers of theirs in other areas. And so just, for all the reasons that Sheila said, but also just like for your own personal growth and development, becoming well-versed in areas outside of your domain makes you far more effective and a far more, successful person long-term.
Right. Rob, like I'll add, like it's not that hard, right? And a lot of people are like leery of like, oh man, like I don't have a finance degree, like I don't understand. Like it's not rocket science. It's pretty basic of like, hey, this is the money coming in, this is the money coming out, this is where it went. But we'll share some resources either in the email or at the end in the chat of some books in which you can, that are really kind of help you on board. And if you go in with kind of this growth mindset of like, hey, I'm just going to learn and better myself, I think the books will really, really help. But don't be afraid of the unknown. And then a lot of times, if you have a great financial partner in the business, so your business controller, they love, love, love talking finance. And many of them also love helping others. And so, take them out to lunch and ask them questions and poke around and continue to learn. But for sure, it might seem daunting at the beginning, but it's not. Just take that first step and you'll find that it's not rocket science.
Yeah, I'll one up that in particular, this area, P&L statements. I feel like it seems like there's a heavy barrier to entry, really not pretty basic arithmetic. And then also, again, sort of a truism of human nature, people want to share what's important to them. They love talking about themselves in their area. And so really the only time someone clams up is when they feel like you're approaching them with judgment or with ulterior motives. But if you're coming to a finance partner, an ops partner with curiosity and a desire to learn, you'll be surprised how just quickly the information comes out because people love to help other people. And by nature, they love to talk about themselves and what they do all day. It's just kind of who we are.
Yeah, that's so true. I think continuous learning is key. I mean, one of the best CEOs that I've worked with, aside from you, Sheila, of course, you're amazing. But one that I really looked up to, his name is Derek Hudson, and he talked a lot about the fact that, you know, even as a CEO of a business, he himself admits, he's like, I really don't have the finance background. I relied heavily on, frankly, doing the homework, researching. I think he read that exact same book that we'll talk more about later.
Yeah.
But he said, I leaned on my CFO. I had conversations with her just to understand everything. And I think it's taking the seat of curiosity and not having shame and continuous learning. So thank you for those insights both. I think that's great. I think we talked a little bit about, you know, why should HR managers think differently? And I think some of what we have talked about in the past is kind of wearing a different set of lenses. So it seems to me like there is some sort of connection potentially between HR managers, right, and operations managers. Um, can you explain a little bit for people like me who don't have as much experience working with HR and ops together? Um, Explain that connection and why it's important to really bridge that connection. And Sheila, if you want to take a stab at that first, and then Rob, we'll get your 2 cents too, of course.
Sure.
Yeah, so HR managers and ops managers are partners in the business, right? The labor cost and productivity are so intertwined, like I explained, in why you should care about the P&L. And ops managers have kind of that purview and are often the ones responsible for the P&L. Like, so some businesses will take the factory and they'll have an entire business P&L for the factory. And then that factory leader will then separate the P&L out almost by line. And so they will then kind of anoint an ops leader to own, the total costs for that particular line. And so those ops leaders then are like finely in tune with what their revenues are, meaning like how many goods are you producing off the line and what does that mean for the business? And then their costs, which are these labor costs and overall productivity. And so there is a direct linkage with HR there.
Got it. And I guess, Rob, from your experience, you've worked with a lot of operations managers. What do you think is the top of their mind? Like, what are they concerned about? What do they care about?
Yeah, I mean, any operational leader, general manager of a facility, right? Their goals and what's top of mind is usually right up on the wall in terms of it's charts of how they're doing on delivery, on time delivery, quality, safety, productivity, all of those things. And so it's not a lack of focus on the HR role or that seems less important. It's just like those are the domains where they exist and where they have to focus. And that is really why that translation layer is so important, is because it is, as Sheila said, it's inextricably tied together. How HR engages and retains the hourly workforce, it has a direct impact on all of the things that matter to the operational leaders. But oftentimes that link is not immediately obvious, and it takes just an extra look and a little bit of curiosity to uncover that, and then a voice to say, look, this is what we're doing, this is the thing that we're impacting, the thing that we're changing.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, I think you have a ton of experience like within TeamSense and even prior to coming TeamSense, where you've sat down and helped people kind of uncover the linkage. Like, can you walk us through an example of what that looks like and how do you and your team like accomplish that?
Yeah, so I think one of my favorite TeamSense stories is we had a deployment with a customer. It was a single site. Deployment was going really, really well. Feedback from the hourly workforce was really strong. The HR managers that were sort of in charge of implementing TeamSense, really positive feedback. And so, we were kind of running our typical play, which is, okay, we've had a very successful deployment. We've got advocates at this site. And now, let's go to the leaders and roll this out across the entire division. And like we've talked about, a lot of the discussion about the benefits of TeamSense in that initial go was very qualitative. was, this has made things so much easier. Things are so much better. These qualitative statements. It's not a measurement, it's a quality. And so the feedback from operational leaders was a stiff arm. And it was like, no, like not even this is not good, but like, we can't even assess this because you haven't given us anything that's measurable. Like, go back and find something measurable. So we worked with those same HR managers at that site, like, surely if things are this good, if you're seeing this difference, that's going to come out somewhere, that's going to be measurable somewhere. Sure enough, we found this drastic reduction in absenteeism from using TeamSense. And we've talked on other webinars about how that happens, right? And so then we were just really excited. We TeamSense, the HR leaders, like, we linked arms, we went back to the operational leaders, we're like, look, measurable reduction in absenteeism. We did it, right? And we're expecting them to just kind of welcome us with open arms. And they stiff-armed us again. And they said, not good enough. Like, what's the tangible benefit? And I think that was a wake-up call for me and my team of, like, it needs to even be further than something measurable. You still have to draw that clear line between the measurable change that you're making and how it hits the P&L. Like, where is it actually making a difference in the things that the operational leaders are measured against every single day? And so we went back and we did research, and we found out that reduction in absenteeism was correlated with a drastic reduction in overtime pay. Because the more people that were showing up, the fewer people that were unexpectedly gone, there was less overtime that had to be offered to others to, fill in for shifts unexpectedly. And so there was this massive reduction in overtime pay to the tune of $700,000 in a year. That got attention, right? That was the thing where the operational leaders suddenly went from, I don't have time for you, we've got bigger fish to fry, to then they were pulling us along, and they were going to their teams and they're saying, we're rolling this out to everybody. It's inexpensive. It makes a huge impact. Get ready. Like, here it comes, because we're doing it for everybody. And so that is less of, an attaboy on us and more of an attaboy on those HR leaders at that company who did the work of, like, okay, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to understand how, like, clearly there's a positive effect here. And I just need to explain it in a way that is relevant to the operational leaders, who are ultimately the ones who decide if this is something that we roll out broadly or not. And when they were able to do it, not only did it allow the entire organization to experience the benefits that single site was, but as you can imagine, I mean, the personal stock of those individuals went up quite a bit too, because they had brought this really important initiative that came along with the TeamSense tool to the forefront, and now the entire organization's benefiting from it.
What I love about that story is kind of just reiterating, like, what is the language of business, right? And making sure that your proposal has that language of business. Another way to think about it is, like, I was working with my 12-year-old last night on some fractions, right? And it's like, you have to get to the common denominator for you to understand, like, how do these things go together? And it's like very similar to that, is like, what is the common denominator? And so when you guys went with absenteeism, they don't understand, like, okay, that's great. Like, what does that even mean? What's the so what? The common denominator is not there. But then when you're able to turn that into dollars, like, that's the common denominator is dollars. And it reminds me of another story, not on getting TeamSense into a customer, but a customer was utilizing TeamSense. And one of the things that we do is we start to provide additional data on the types of absences. And so they were able to tell from their data that a lot of folks were unable to make it to work because of car trouble. And so they had kind of this intuitive feeling all along of, like, hey, if we had a carpool program, we'd be able to help out our employees and bring them in. And, like, obviously when the employees are here, we can produce more. But without that TeamSense data, they were unable to actually link how many absences were tied to car trouble, which then is tied to loss of production, which then is tied to dollars. But once we were able to give them that data, they finally could make that link. That was like the missing piece to then get a carpool program up and running to ensure that their workers can make it despite, whatever their personal situation is with their transportation. And so another example of, like, that HR person knew, like, wholeheartedly that this would make a difference, but they could not get it past the initial gatekeepers because they were not speaking that same language of dollars. But having the right data and figuring out how to link it was the key to unlocking it.
That example, Sheila, reminds me that, there are some repeatable patterns that we see across customers, particularly within the same sub industries. But these business justifications or these translations that happen, they are as varied as the customers that we have. And so there's not really a simple formula of like, well, just go look at overtime or go look at carpools, right? It's like, and that's why this, maybe initial step of having sort of a curious conversation with operational leaders or financial leaders, learning about what matters to them. And then when it comes time to figure out like, where is the impact of this, in our case, TeamSense, where is the impact of this initiative that I want to bring forth? You can ask questions and be curious with them. And I often I like it too, like the conversations I have with my 6-year-old who like it's like, I'll tell him something and he'll say, why? And it's not like he's not being a little punk, like he is genuinely curious. He's 6 years old. He's experiencing the world for the first time. Why, Dad? I'm like, well, I don't know, son, because why? And it's just this never ending loop of why. But what's interesting is like, that helps me realize, there's these things that I just there are assumptions that I live with every day that I assume are self-evident to everybody else. And maybe they're not. That happens in business too. There are things, like my example with reducing absenteeism. It's like, well, why is reducing absenteeism good? There's almost this sense of, why should I even have to tell you? Of course it's good. Like it's self-evident, but by allowing ourselves to ask why and digging deeper, you can figure out where it actually matters. And that I think is probably the closest thing to a formula for figuring this out, is when you get engaged with someone that you want to understand their impact, is ask them why over and over. Like what happens if, in the case of TeamSense, what happens if people don't have an efficient way to call off that instantly notifies their supervisors? Well, the supervisors won't know who's going to be on shift when the shift starts. That sounds bad, sounds self-evident, but let's ask why again. Why is that bad? Okay, well, if they don't know who's going to be on shift, then they're not able to plan who's going to run each machine. Interesting. That sounds terrible. But why is that bad, right? You can keep asking why and why and why. And what you'll find is you'll eventually get to a place where I guarantee you it happens every time. There is a measurable thing. There is a metric in there that someone is held accountable to that your initiative or TeamSense can impact.
I love that. Like, I would say, like, tell us a little bit about how our sales team, or how you instruct our sales team to help HR do that, right? Because they're not alone. Like, what should they expect? Like, not just from TeamSense, okay, fine, but like in general, like what should they expect from other vendors coming in? What should they expect from partners? And how might they kind of leverage others to help bring them along in the process?
Any vendor you work with, like the world of slick sales pitches, it has long since died. Do not choose a vendor based on how slick the sales pitch is. Choose a vendor who is putting together with you resources, whether that's the salesperson that you're working with one-on-one, or the resources that salesperson is bringing with them to help, that arm you to understand your own business better and affect outcomes. Anytime that you're doing anything, whether it's an internal initiative or you're buying a product, that is change. Large corporations are by nature change averse. They are risk averse, right? If whatever is happening, whatever is broken, working, whatever, the business is running today, and a change has the potential to upset that delicate balance. And so we are vendors, also you HR partners in this situation where you're buying a product or you're putting forth an initiative, you're asking a very large, very risk averse organization to change because of some potential perceived benefit. And so you should expect of your vendor partners that they can help you with those translation layers to other parts of the organization. You should expect of your vendor partners that they can help get access for you to those people within your own organization. You should expect that they are your vendor partners are experts, not necessarily on the nuances of your own particular business, although they should be over time, but they are absolutely experts in how they get their product into your hands and help you transform over time. If the end point of your relationship is when the deal is signed, that's a bad red flag. The end point should be when you see all the fruits of the expected value that you've understood over the course of that relationship. That's when things are like, okay, now we've achieved what we've set out to do, and now we're going to go even further, and we're going to do things that are that next layer of value.
That's a really good point on, actually visualizing and reaping the benefits of whatever you set out to do and the goals that you set. What are some like indicators, or like how do you instruct the TeamSense sales team to assist HR in that like post sale? Like what are some things that you guys that we do?
Yeah, there's a balance that you have to walk between sort of like quick wins, quick return on investment, quick benefits, and long-term transformational benefits. Specifically with TeamSense, the initial benefit that you see from TeamSense is we are automating the call-off process. And what that looks like is a drastic reduction in no-call, no-shows right off the bat, like as soon as deployment happens. And then pretty quickly behind that, you'll see a reduction in absenteeism. There's some operational efficiency benefits that come with using an automated tool like TeamSense. And so those are things where, we say, hey, let's measure a jumping off point before things are deployed so that we can show in measurable terms the benefits that you see early. And typically those returns that come very, very fast are smaller than the bigger transformational benefits that we're aiming for down the road, the things that we talk about with engagement and retention. TeamSense not only automates the call-off process, we also create a digital connection through which you can retain and engage the hourly workforce. Those are longer term benefits. They're much, much larger when we quantify those benefits with our customers, things like a major reduction in attrition or higher productivity because workers are more engaged. That's a much larger benefit in raw dollars, but that's something that takes time. And so there's a balance that has to happen between fast benefits and long-term large benefits. And our best, customer partners, our HR manager partners, they understand that, and they work with us. Really, we work with them to empower them with what are the right metrics to track, what are the right conversations to have, and then where and when is it appropriate to shine the spotlight on the things that you've done. One thing that I share with my team quite often is, in my experience, folks that join the HR track are typically pretty unselfish people. Like they chose that job because they want to help and promote others. They want others to be successful. And that's why it's like we love interacting with HR people, because they're great to work with. I think sometimes it can feel self-serving to shine the spotlight on good things that happen, or to try to build a case for why you should get the software tool that you want, or why your initiative should be top priority. The reality is, and this is what I share with my team, what my team shares with their customer partners, is like that can be one of the most unselfish processes in the business world, because you really have to get outside of yourself, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and understand why it's important to them. And if what you're doing doesn't benefit the whole organization, then maybe it's not the right thing to do. By going and understanding all of your peers in sort of a cross-functional domain, you can get a holistic picture of what benefits this company, and by nature of that, all of the hourly workers that I'm here to support. Those are the things that then you can go fight for with conviction.
I love that idea. I think, to take it to the 10,000 foot view level of, from how TeamSense specifically does it to, best practices for HR. I think what you said to me was, the effort on getting your initiative in place doesn't end when you launch the software or you launch the initiative. It's really this ongoing thing of like, hey, like, what do we think is going to be the first place where we see the impact of that? like that short-term win and identifying that so that you can identify that like, hey, that's a leading indicator that it's working and it's doing what we thought. And so you said initially there's something where, it kind of appears that like, hey, we've seen this reduction in no call, no shows. That's like that first indicator of like, ooh, this is working. We want to watch that. And you want to make sure that you have thought about in advance what that marker is and like, what is that first way that it appears. But then some of these wins are much longer. Like if I think about, employee engagement and retention and like the plethora of things that could potentially do that, like understanding that initial marker, because engagement and retention happens, over a long period of time before you see that transformation. And then understanding kind of what is that transformation you're trying to see, when you might see that, and then benchmarking beforehand. And so there's a lot of thought and process that goes into these new tools and these initiatives and deployments, before you get going. And so just thinking about that, like that's a really good best practice for everyone. So thanks for diving into that.
Yeah, that pre-deployment phase, for whatever reason, often seems like that's the race. That's the warm-up. That's the training, right? The race begins, the starting gun shoots when deployment happens, and then it's let's track what we expected, and let's track it against what happens in reality, and what's the first thing that we should see that's going well. And in our case, it's reduction of no call, no shows. What's the second thing? Reduction in absenteeism and operational benefits. And then what are the things long term, and how do we measure those and make sure that those things are actually happening? Greater engagement, better retention. Again, you should expect your vendor partner to be walking arm in arm with you and helping you understand how to do all of that. But to the extent that you HR managers can be proactive about saying, this is how I want to approach this initiative or this project, and vendor partner, what do you got for me? Like, I expect you to help me with this. Like, that's only going to increase your odds of success.
Yeah, I love that. Just to jump in. So I feel like it feels like this positive domino effect, right? Where the HR manager is tapped into what the operations manager is concerned about. So clearly the goal is to empower the HR manager to then empower the operations manager, which then ultimately will always have an impact on the P&L. It seems to me, obviously, that data is the key driver here. Setting up your organization to actually be able to collect data and make decisions on that, and knowing how to make decisions on that is important too, because we're in the age of there's data everywhere. How do you know what to actually do with the data when you get it, right? So we talked a little bit about kind of those quick wins, right? In terms of attendance management and how that can have an impact on the P&L. I do want to touch a little bit more on kind of that longer impact where it was really around employee engagement. It seems like employee engagement, it's one of those big ideas in the cloud where you're like, okay, how do I bring this down, break this up into some pieces and actually tackle it, right? What do you think are some unique challenges associated with really engaging with the hourly workforce and kind of actually implementing employee engagement strategies? And either Sheila, Rob, whoever feels most passionate about taking a stab at this, feel free to jump in here.
I've been talking a lot. Sheila, you take a turn.
Yeah, so I think, engaging and enabling the hourly workforce is such a unique problem and has really been kind of pointed post-COVID, right? I know that in my experience, pre-COVID, there was it's seemingly a lot more workers to fill the gaps. And so, if workers kind of turned over or they were not satisfied with the company, at least, from my experience at General Motors, you're like, there's a long line of other people that want this role. And so it wasn't that much of a big deal. And you're like, okay, like you're not happy, I'll bring in the next person. Like that doesn't happen today. And so it's so helpful with the worker shortages that we're seeing out in the market impacting every business, that you really think about like, how do you engage and enable them? Well, with these workers being in such high demand and in most cases not digitally connected, that becomes really hard because you're trying to, select employees and not kind of beat them down with messages, but like meet them where they are. And so do they want to kind of raise their hand and, learn more about the company and the company earnings call? Or are they just rather like, hey, I'm just here to do my job. And I want to be good at that, and understanding the differences and having tools and capabilities that meet them whether they're that person A or person B is really, really important. And so that's a big challenge for HR today is like, okay, how do we get the tools in place to meet them where they are and then understand what it is that they really care about and how do we drive them? There's a really cool example of one of our customers that is a large warehouse facility. And most companies do these employee engagement surveys where the employees give feedback on, what it is that would help motivate them or drive them or what changes they want to see in the company. And in this particular case, the employees really wanted more agency over their environment. They're like, hey, we want more control over the environment. Well, when you work in a warehouse facility, the dock doors are constantly open and closing as you're putting and loading goods. And so it's really hard in particular to manage temperature. But environment is not just temperature. There's lots of other things. There's lighting, there's sound. And so this company then kind of did a further study with the employees and learned that, if they allowed the employees to have some agency over a portion of the environment, like the sound, it would help kind of move their engagement retention metrics a little bit further. And so what they actually do is they send out a survey via TeamSense every Friday, allowing the employees to vote on what Pandora station is played in the warehouse that week. And so while it might seem as something small, it is something that they can have agency over, they can have control over, and is one of those elements of like, hey, you have to control what you can control and let go what you cannot control. And so, a small example that makes, a meaningful difference, but when you start stacking up these examples of meaningful differences where you can actually start to drive incremental change.
I've talked to a lot of different HR leaders and VPs of HR, CHROs, and all of them are pretty consistent on measuring things like recruiting or retention. But man, when you ask somebody how they measure engagement, you get a whole bunch of different kinds of answers. And so, Sheila, your example of taking something that comes from a survey directly from the mouths of the hourly worker, putting it into practice, and then doing that follow-up loop and saying like, hey, see, here's something that we did. That's going to have a measurable impact on engagement, but that's not the thing that's going to work everywhere. Like there are some factories where we work with where it's not an environment where somebody could even hear music because they're all in ear protection during the shift. And so I would say, for the HR folks that are on the call here, this is another time when you need to get curious, like find out how is engagement measured at your company. And again, it seems self-evident that bringing engagement up is a good thing. Sometimes there can even be like a strategic initiative, something that comes all the way down from the top, something that shows up on the financial reports of the company of we need better engaged people. How is that measured, and how do you know if you're doing well? Like, what does that actually look like? We have an automotive supplier customer where they were having just abysmal take rates on their annual survey. I think it was something like 8% of their hourly workforce at a particular facility was participating in the annual survey. They had this initiative at the site to increase the participation in the annual survey. They use TeamSense to do that by using our digital connection for communication to help promote the annual survey, and annual survey participation in the following year went to 88%. And it was like this huge, like high five, woohoo, that's awesome. Then they looked at the results of the survey and the engagement scores year over year actually went down. And there was this brief moment in the meeting where it was like, oh, we failed. And whoa. No, we absolutely succeeded because that low sentiment existed in your organization before. You just had no visibility into it. The engagement is more than just making people happy. It's giving folks a voice and getting visibility for what is the really of what's happening on the floor. And the more that can happen in this particular case, getting better visibility to the folks that maybe last year were so disengaged they didn't even want to participate in the survey, that allowed them to make better, broader decisions about how to increase engagement. So all that to say, get curious, find out what does engagement look like at your particular company, and how is it measured? Somebody somewhere, not the people that are told to go increase engagement, but the people that decided that engagement is the thing we want to go do. Somebody somewhere knows what they're looking for, what metric is going to change to show that that's happening.
So let's play the game a little bit, Rob. So, okay, now I see like I've got an engagement initiative. I know the employees want something specifically. I'm an HR manager, you're my vendor. Like, help me walk through, how do I translate that to dollars? Like you told me previously that I need to translate this to the common denominator of dollars. Like, how might I do that?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost is, identifying the things that you can do. You gave the great example of the music in the facility, the feedback or the follow-up layer that comes from that, from making sure that the hourly workforce sees that they've been heard and that changes are happening based on their feedback. Those are things that are going to increase engagement. But how is that going to play out on a P&L? Well, if workers are more engaged, we can assume that they're probably going to be more productive while they're there. They're probably going to be absent fewer times. They're probably going to stay at the company longer. Somebody who doesn't like their job, that doesn't feel like they're being heard, that doesn't feel like the company's making any changes based on their feedback, they're going to be more likely to skip work. They're going to be less productive while they're there. They're going to be more likely to go across the street when the facility, next door offers an extra $1 per hour. So we would expect that there would be measurable changes, probably first in absenteeism, second in productivity, and then third longer term in retention. Now, in particular, retention, that's going to be a long tail. You're going to have to see that trend over time. And there are a lot of factors that play into something like retention. So what we do with our customers is, if we expect to see an outcome or a benefit like that, we have a conversation with the folks that have skin in the game on why that matters, on what that expectation would be. And usually it's a bit of a negotiation of, how much of an impact do we think it would be? And how do we calculate or think about, other factors that might impact it. And so if we think that, attrition should go down by 30% across 2 years or something. Well, is all of that because of TeamSense? Probably not. There are probably other factors too. So what portion of that is due to TeamSense? And then out of that, what portion of that can we attribute to this specific thing that we've done around engagement? And there's a bit of a negotiation there, but that's why it's so important to have the direct and curious conversations with the people that actually own those metrics, because kind of the open secret is, coming out of that meeting, those numbers are owned by everybody. It's not a vendor saying, here's the benefit that you're going to see, like some infomercial you see on TV. It's not even you, the HR manager, saying, here's the benefits you're going to see. It's collectively the group, operational leaders, finance, HR, all saying, we've all agreed that this is a realistic view of the benefit, and this is what we expect to see. And then you can assess how you've done as you go down the road, but it's with everybody, skin in the game. There's no finger pointing. There's no, I called it. I'm the king of the castle. I knew it was going to happen. We all win together. We all, make adjustments together when there's issues that we don't expect. That buy-in cross-functionally is really critical.
The other important thing that I think you said that is important is, don't let perfect get in the way of good. And so you're really looking for kind of this 80-20 relationship. And oftentimes, because there's so many factors going into something like employee engagement or retention, do they have a good manager? Do you have competitive pay? Like, what is going on in the market? Like, there's so many other things. I think the important thing that you talked about was, hey, you're likely not going to get a perfect analysis, but if you're 80% right, and like, what is that margin of error? Like, does it matter? Probably not. I think from what you're saying is like, okay, everybody kind of looks at it and says, like, logically it makes sense that we would get this. And so that is going to be the target that we go up. And so there has to be a sense of, when is that good enough? Do you have any point of view on, like, when do you get to that point where you're like, okay, like, this is good enough, and we've got the 80-for-20, and like, extra work trying to make this perfect is just not going to be valuable to the business?
I would say, instead of avoiding the people who are against you and detractors, make them as close as possible. Bring them into the fold. And the people that say, this isn't going to work and we're not going to see these benefits, get their voices in the room and create a business justification or a metric improvement expectation that has their rubber stamp on it, also as something that's realistic and possible. We're talking about some pretty major problems in the workforce as a whole, and particularly in manufacturing, warehousing, and logistics. Absenteeism is multi-hundred-billion-dollar problem. And so it doesn't take a huge shift. We're not talking about a jump from A to Z. We're talking about, an incremental shift that then, has effects down the road that can be very, very large in terms of dollars. And so even if we concede, that our expectation is off by double, sometimes you're still showing such a great benefit that it's undeniable that this is something that the company should do, that it's going to benefit all people. And so I would say, get something that's directionally accurate. Don't overcook it. Don't try, when I come in and I see like massive pages and pages of spreadsheets of, one metric affecting the other, like this has got to be something that you can show on a napkin to somebody who that translation layer, that maybe this isn't their domain of expertise, something that's logical, something that's defensible, that passes sort of the smell test of is it possible? Is it realistic? And if even the folks that are not on board with it, that have concerns or are detractors, can admit that, okay, yeah, that's directionally correct. I'm not sure that we're exactly on target, but I'll agree that it's directionally correct. Then again, you've got what you need, because everybody's got skin in the game. They're all agreeing that this is the path that you want to go.
I love it. I feel like the theme of the webinar is how to get skin in the game, how to empower yourself to have skin in the game. I love it. So we are running over time, which is great because obviously we could talk about this all day, but I do want to make sure we get to some Q&A. Just to summarize very briefly in terms of some of what we talked about in terms of next steps. So I think what we mentioned was, okay, financial education could be helpful, right? We hinted at a couple of resources that could be beneficial to you if you want to get started, or if you just want to brush up on your finance skills. So these are two books recommended by Sheila. I've actually have read the financial intelligence one myself as well, and can highly recommend it too. I had to read it actually in a finance class in college, so that's fantastic. So we'll send out a link to these resources as well when we send the follow-up email. The other thing we talked about too is obviously make a connection with your operations manager, bridge that gap if there is a gap, really get comfortable talking with them, maybe even have a conversation with someone within the finance department of your organization. And then I think what we can always hone in on as well is expect and request that your vendor should be an expert in helping empower you to make these decisions that will have an impact on the P&L. So push back a little bit more on your vendors to really help arm you to have these conversations with the people in your organization that do have the skin in the game, so that therefore you can have skin in the game too. So without further ado, let's get into some questions that came through, and we'll go through them pretty quickly here. But while I have the questions coming through, I thought I would put this up on the board. As always, if you do want to get in touch with us and learn more about TeamSense, a great way to do it is to schedule a demo. You can go to teamsense.com/demo. As always, you can follow us on all the social media channels you could ever think of. That's where we post really cool things like our blogs that we write, our webinars that are coming. Sheila just wrote a really amazing article about absenteeism. And so we've just recently shared that too, so feel free to take a look. And then of course, for every webinar we have each week, you get an email reminder, but you can go to teamsense.com/webinars. So let's hop into it. So one question that came through, I think this is a good one. I am not privy to the P&L in my organization at all. Where would I start, and who should I go to even get that information?
Yeah, great question. I think go to your finance partner. So nearly every organization has a controller of some sort, and just get curious with them. They shouldn't want to hide it. If they do, or they're not comfortable in sharing the full kind of P&L, I would go to the head of your HR. So that's either, at the site level or at the director level or at the company level, and ask them to understand at least HR's portion and explain to them why you want to learn and how you might benefit, and what's the great benefit for HR, like we all talked about in this webinar, to understanding the full P&L. Like, how can you impact, the business in a strategic way without the full understanding?
I'll mention too, it's rare that someone from an outside organization like a vendor or a salesperson gets access to a P&L, but don't necessarily have to see it to know what impacts it, right? And the only three reasons why any business does anything: save money, make money, or change the world. And so if you can figure out, what are the big boulders, what are the big rocks that the company's trying to push uphill in terms of getting more revenue or reducing costs, you can be guaranteed that that's going to hit the P&L, because that's exactly what the P&L is.
Got it. Yep, that's a great answer. Okay, and last question real quick, we'll get in here. So what are some examples of some key performance indicators HR should really keep top of mind in terms of tracking their impact? What would you say are, like, let's say, the top 3?
Go ahead, Rob. You do
Yep.
all these business cases.
Overtime is a common one, right? How much overtime are you paying out? Often organizations will overstaff. They will overbook a shift to just account for unexpected absences. So overstaffing is something to look at. And then I would say, all the other things that we've talked about, productivity, retention, attrition, those are typically the areas to look at. One new one that I've kind of become aware of too is a lot of companies, particularly that have specialized tooling, will have highly metric measurements on the utilization of those tools, and that can directly relate to the people that are running those tools. And so you can sometimes you'll find blips on those reports in terms of tool utilization because of personnel issues, something that the HR team can affect directly.
That's great. Okay, well, Rob, Sheila, this has been so insightful. I feel empowered already. I'm not even an HR manager, but I think this applies to anybody in any part of the business they work in. I know for me, it applies to my work in marketing, right? How can I make an impact on our company goals and the P&L as well? So thank you both for your time. Thank you to everybody that joined us. If you have not yet taken a look at teamsense.com/webinars, you'll see we'll be hanging out next week again. So thank you to everybody that joined again, and we will see you next week. Thanks,
Thanks,
y'all.
everyone. Take
Thanks,
care.
everybody. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.